Hey YouTube, this is tcgsam here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over the deck I used to get second place at my OTS Championships the last weekend, that being K9 Crystron. I'm going to be talking about how I decided on certain ratios in my deck and why I'm playing certain cards, and I'm going to be talking about these in depth, so this video is probably going to be a longer one. So if you just want the list, then I'm going to put up a quick screenshot on the screen right now so you can just see it. And I'll also be going over my matchups throughout the day at the end, and also talk about a few cards that I would consider changing. So if you guys enjoy these more in-depth like IRL deck profiles, do let me know. I'm happy to make more of those. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into it. So starting off with the Crystron Engine, we're playing 3 copies of Salvador and 2 copies of Self-Efnir for the level 5s. Basically, the synergy with the Crystron and the K9 stuff is that the K9s work with any level 5s, and the Crystron level 5s, are, especially Salvador, are some of the most like broken level 5s that we have in the game right now. Salvador, essentially when it's summoned, you get to dump 2 Crystron cards from your deck to the grave, and it's like full combo by itself. Self-Efnir is like an extra extender if you have like other additional Crystron cards. It helps you play around cards like Droll and things of that nature. But the reason I chose this ratio specifically with like 3 Salvador and 2 Self-Efnir is because I just felt like I always wanted to see Salvador plus one of the K9 cards that summons it from hand. And that was just like the best combo that I had in my deck. So I just wanted to max out on Salvador so I could see it as often as possible. Because Self-Efnir generally like required me to always have like another Crystron card. And if I pair this with like the K9 Jokel, it doesn't do nearly as much. The other reason why I didn't play like 3 Self-Efnir was because I didn't want to play like too many level 5s. Once you start playing too many, like you start kind of breaking on them if you don't see like the K9 Jokel. And Self-Efnir actually doesn't work with itself. Like you can't discard itself to summon. I just felt like Self-Efnir was just not that great, which is why I ultimately played like this ratio. 5 is also like the perfect number because during your combo, you're going to go through 1 Salvador. There's a chance your Salvador is going to dump another like Self-Efnir or something into your grave. And then later on in your combo, you're going to resolve Tristaros to pop your Synchro to summon 2 more from the deck. And that leaves you with 1 more in the deck to resolve Tristaros on your opponent's turn. So I think 5 was just the perfect number. I never felt like I ran out. Even when I ran out, you could just always use the Crystron trap to put the cards, put the level 5s back into the deck. So that's the reason I played that ratio of level 5s. For the other Crystron monsters, I played 1 copy of Smyger, 1 copy of Bisfern, and 1 copy of Tristaros. So this may seem kind of weird because in a standard Crystron deck, you're like maxing out on Smyger because it is a 1-card starter in theory. The reason I'm just playing like one of these is because the K9 stuff just like gets you to your engine super easily. You don't need to start playing like more copies of Smyger to try to like normal summon and play from there. Because if you do that like the Smyger combo, you actually can't get access to the K9 part of the deck just by itself. So Smyger actually isn't that great of a normal summon in this deck. Of course, it's still a really good card and like it's used in every single one of the combos, but I think 1 is more than enough. You have many ways to like dump it to the graveyard. This Vern is an interesting one. I originally didn't want to play this card, but I felt like it would come up in situations where I would need access to like Self-Efnir being able to pitch a card to be able to get an extra extender. And it did come up a few times for that. But unfortunately, I kept drawing this very specifically one of Bisfern for some reason. So it was a little annoying because you can't like combo with it like you can with Smyger. And then lastly, 1 copy of Tristaros only. Tristaros is not like the worst normal summon in the deck if you have other ways to play, but generally you just want to be tutoring this out with cards like Self-Efnir from the deck or dumping into the graveyard and then reviving it with the Crystron spell card. I think 1 is definitely more than enough. You have like Smyger, you have so many different ways to access it. This is kind of like the minimal Crystron engine that like you need to be able to have like a working game plan with the Crystron cards, like if you just draw them by themselves. So I think like this was totally okay. I never really missed like the 2nd copy of Tristaros ever, or like missed like extra copies of Smyger Thisfern. I think this was honestly like the perfect ratio, and in the future I don't think I would change this ratio of Crystron's. I think the only thing like maybe there's some argument for is like sliding out Thisfern when going 2nd, but in general I think that you don't necessarily need to play a heavier Crystron count. You can if you want to. You can start playing cards like Citri and all that if you want to get access to Corian Gondrax. But I didn't want to introduce more of those like bricks into my deck, which is why ultimately I decided to go with as minimal of a Crystron engine as possible. And then for the other part of the Crystron engine, I'm playing 3 copies of Crystron Inclusion. This is definitely the best Crystron starter in the deck. Gets you access to any Crystron card, and then in the graveyard, it's a Monster Reborn. You definitely go through both effects throughout every turn, and you always try to search it with either Smyger or dump it to the graveyard with Salvador to get your plays going. So not much to really say about this. Definitely the best Crystron starter in the deck. And then 1 copy of Crystron Cluster. This card is also really good. It just once per turn shuffles a banished Crystron or a Crystron on the grave to pop a card on the field. And if you have a Crystron Synchro monster, you get to pop 2 cards. So this card is not only your grind game and recursion, but it just also adds an extra layer to your end board, so you don't lose as hard to board breakers like Dark Ruler No More or Forbidden Droplets, things like that. And then for another Crystron starter, one copy of Foolish Burial. This was just an additional starter because you could dump Smire and that would be a 1-card combo that way. You could also dump Sofefnir if you needed an extender, Sulfador if you needed an extender. It just did a lot for this deck, so I felt like there's no reason not to play it. Something to note though is like against Yummy, when they end on Herald of Arclight, its on-field effect is kind of annoying. It does turn off Foolish Burial, but that didn't come up too often. And then I guess lastly, an honorary Crystron card, it's going to be Scrap Recycler. And the reason I'm playing Scrap Recycler is because there's a rank 5 in the extra deck that searches Earth Machines, and that means it allows your K9 side of the deck to bridge into the Crystron side of your deck. So if you only see K9 cards, you're still able to get to your Crystron cards because you play this. Basically, all it does is like on normal summon, you dump a Crystron Smigger to the graveyard, and then there's your Crystron combo from there. So it's not really even a brick. It is like a slightly weaker normal summon, because it does end up losing to cards like Imperm and things like that, but you definitely still have to play it to bridge the engines together. And then for the other part of my deck, I did play the K9 cards, starting off with 3 copies of Jokol. Jokol might be one of the best K9 monsters in my opinion because it pairs so well with any other level 5. It just gets you an instant rank 5 right away, but also puts so much pressure on your opponent to like hand trap you early, because if you reveal Jokol plus Sulfador, which is like the best combo in this deck, Sulfador just gets its effect right away, and like if your opponent doesn't stop that, then like you're getting access to like infinite Crystron Engine no matter what else they have in their hands. And plus the bonus effect to search like another K9 that isn't itself is also really strong. It allows you to grab Lantern for additional Xyz plays, or Azuna to insulate yourself from hand traps any further. So definitely one of the best K9 monsters in the deck, and it's also one of the reasons why this deck works in the first place. And then for the other part of the K9 engine, 3 copies of Azuna and 1 copy of Lupus. So not only is this a very, very powerful hand trap, because you can make a rank 5 on your opponent's turn now, Azuna also acts as an extender on your own turn when you do get hit with like monster hand traps. You just get an instant rank 5 out of Azuna, which can just help you keep playing through most of the low impact hand traps a lot of the times. Not to mention, Lupus is also a very good card to have under your Xyz monsters. It makes it so they can't be targeted by card effects. That effect definitely came up a lot for me whenever I got to summon a Lupus out onto the field, and actually just wins you games in certain matchups because they just don't have a good way to deal with an Xyz monster that can't be targeted. So definitely also a very important part of the K9 engine. It's essentially both engine and non-engine, which is the nice part. And then for the last K9 monster in the main deck, just 1 copy of Lantern. Lantern just doesn't really do nearly as much on its own as like the other K9s that requires you to start playing, which is why we only play 1. But I think 1 is definitely still important because you're still searching it throughout your combo once you get your K9 stuff going, and it's just an instant rank 5 plus access to a K9 spell, just like a bonus K9 that you search throughout your combo. That just gets you an extra rank 5, but you don't want to play more of it because it's not a starter. It doesn't really do much on its own. And then I'm playing 1 copy of K9 X-Force Release. This is the rank up spell for the K9 monsters. Like you can get access to it through Lantern. Your rank 5 Ripper also gets to set it. This turns Ripper into Werewolf on your opponent's turn while popping a card. So definitely a very, very powerful interruption, and also adds an additional layer to your end board on top of Crystron Cluster, just to make it so your end board doesn't lose to a single card like Dark Lure No More. I drew this card a lot as well in addition to this run, and it just felt really bad a lot of the times because if you aren't able to get to Ripper, then this card is just effectively dead because it forces you to rank up on top of a Crystron monster. I think there is maybe some argument to consider the other K9 rank up spell, and basically LC Liberation just makes it so you can rank up on top of any rank 5 or K9 monster, and you could do it during any phase. It doesn't have to be during the main phase, but at the cost of not being able to pop a card off of using X-Force Release. And the reason like why I think that card is a consideration is because like you do also make like other rank 5s in this deck a lot. This can help you dodge like things like targeting on them as well. But in general, I feel like that just doesn't come up nearly as much as like the extra pop from the X-Force Release. So ultimately I decided to go with this card even though it isn't that great of a draw. Like it's definitely a brick in the deck that you don't want to see. So I do end up siding this out going second a lot, but going first, it definitely makes your half boards, it makes your full boards a lot better. And then for the last part of the K9 engine, I played 1 copy of Chaotic Elements and 1 copy of Case of K9. So starting with Case of K9, this is the in-engine searcher for K9. Just on activation, search a K9 monster, and then it boosts all your K9s by 900 attack if your opponent had used a monster effect in the hand that turn. That effect doesn't really come up. It also have kind of a cool effect to where if it gets popped, you get to set the quick play spell directly from your deck. That effect also never came up for me because I always had access to the quick play spell like outside of that. But there are some cases where you can go like Sofefnir summon itself, pop Case of K9, and then Case of K9 can set the quick play spell directly from the deck if you need to access it that way. You also want to play at least one of it to search off Lantern, just in case you need Lantern to search more monsters. And I played 1 copy of Chaotic Elements. Chaotic Elements is an interesting one. Because this is not a card that's like really seen in many other decks. Basically, all it does is it searches Jokel or Lantern, and then it also has a neat bonus effect to where if your opponent has like a Detonator, you can just take it because Detonator is a light pyro. So it actually is really good into the Ryzeo matchup because not only is it a consistency card, it also just happens to out their boss monster. Now that effect never came up for me, but in the future I think I do want to play more copies of these in like some combination, maybe like 2/2 or like 3 chaotic elements, like 1 case of K9, something like that. Just because I feel like when you see like the K9 side of the deck, they are very resilient to hand traps and will heavily punish your opponent for hand trap being used. The reason for this event why I only played 1 and 1 is because I was a little worried that people were still going to be main decking Droll. I wasn't too sure how many people would actually allocate Droll to the side deck or just not play it at all. So I didn't want to play too many search cards like this that would make me lose a bit harder to Droll. But having played like over like a few matches in the new format now, I feel like Droll is just not that popular of a card anymore, especially not in the main deck. In the future, I definitely want to probably bump up Chaotic Elements and Case of K9 both, just so I'm able to access that side of the deck more often. And in terms of like which one you should play more of, I think like there are like marginal differences between the two. Like this one, Chaotic Elements is obviously better into Detonator, but Case of K9 is more flexible in the sense that it can be searched by Lantern, and it also can grab you a Zuno, which is important because Chaotic Elements can't do that. So I think there's kind of a trade-off for playing more copies of one or the other, but at the end of the day, like they both effectively do the similar things for this deck. So that's it for the engine. I played a total of 22 engine cards, which left room for 18 non-engine. I think that was a fair number to play. 18 might even be considered high for this deck because if you guys have seen like Yassine 656's list, he only plays like 16 non-engine in the main deck and just ups like his engine count a little bit more. And in the future, that's something I do want to test, but for this, like the first event of the new format, I was scared that people were still going to be playing like the old decks like Malice and Mitsurugi Ryzeo that require you to hand trap them. So I did still ultimately play like 18 non-engine. The first one being 3 copies of Fulos. Definitely the best Charmy in the new format. It just hits everything. And it's also one of the hand traps that can do enough just by itself. So definitely want to max out on this. I also did want to play Perulia in my deck, but unfortunately I didn't have access to it, which led me to play something else. But if I did have access to it, I would also play Perulia because I think it generally has pretty good coverage into most of the top decks, even though it can be argued that like Perulia is a bit easier to play around than Fulos for them. As for the other hand traps, I played 3 copies of Ash. This one is pretty self-explanatory, just the best generic hand trap and is able to stop chummies when going first. And then I played 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. This one felt like kind of iffy. In theory, it's good because it never plays into the K9 cards, which is why I ultimately played it. And in theory, it can be used as your 6th card, so it just really should never be dead. But in practice, I kind of felt like as an actual hand trap, I was rarely ever stopping anything meaningful from my opponent. Like against like Yummy, for example, like even if I imperm like their Snatchy, if they have any extender, like can just keep playing from there. It never really felt that good, and I felt like I was just hand looping myself a lot of the times. That being said though, I think I would still continue to play Imperm in the future just because of the fact that it's just one of the few hand traps that doesn't trigger the K9 monsters. Like you can't play like any of the Dominus cards in this deck because you have so many different attributes, so you only have Imperm as your hand trap that doesn't trigger K9s. Even though Imperm isn't necessarily the most high impact card, I think it does have enough flexibility, and the utility of just not triggering K9 cards is important enough for me to want to continue playing in the future as well. And then one of the other non-engine cards I played was Forbidden Droplet. The theory in this deck is that since a lot of your Crystron stuff benefits from being in the graveyard, in fact, I think like every single one of your Crystron cards, aside from like Cluster, just actually does something in the graveyard. So just being able to send your Crystron to the grave isn't really that much of a cost. And even cards like Sulfador and Sulfafnir, they're literally the same card whether they're in the hand or the graveyard. So Droplet just doesn't feel like it has as heavy of a cost in this deck. And for that reason, I decided to ultimately play it. I thought it was also going to be a solid board breaker. And in practice, it was pretty decent for the most part. There were some matchups like Yummy where I felt like it wasn't as great as I thought it was. But it did have enough flexibility in the sense that I could use it against pretty much every single matchup like Yummy, Draco Tail, other K9 decks. It was good, especially against the K9 decks, because it allows you to stop Azuna turn 1 from being able to summon a rank 5 on your turn and just devastate you completely. It's also able to stop turn 0 interactions from decks like Banker Soul with Holy Sue and decks like Draco Tail with 5 mana summoning a fusion monster. So overall, I think that even though Droplet isn't a hand trap, I think it does have enough justification in this deck to like warrant playing in the future. I think I definitely would continue playing in the future just because of like all the reasons that I mentioned. It just feels like this deck is like the best deck that can take advantage of a powerful board breaker like this. And then the last hand trap I played in my deck was 3 copies of Ghost Stoker, and this one was something I was kind of experimenting with. My theory with Ghost Ogre is that it is also able to hit a lot of the best decks in the format right now for relatively high impact. So if you think about decks like K9 Vanquish Soul, like the biggest target you're going to hit is the Vanquish Soul Field Spell, but that almost feels like you're trading 1 for 2 or sometimes even 2.5 because the Field Spell just has 3 very, very relevant effects. And getting rid of the Field Spell generally means they won't have access to it for the rest of the game. I guess all the K9 decks, like similar to the theory with Dropless, if your opponent Azunas you on your first turn and they try to Lupus afterwards, you can just Ogre the Lupus and they can't XE summon and you get rid of Lupus as well forever. In K9 Mirror Match, the person who's able to like use Lupus more, I think has such a big advantage. Not to mention against decks like Yummy, I think the theory was also like there are going to be some hands where your opponent only has like a quote unquote bad Yummy starter with like Lollipop, and when they go to activate Snatchy effect, if you just Ogre Snatchy, they can't do anything unless they have another extender because they don't control Link 1 for the field spell. I also felt like Ogre had enough utility when going second, even being drawn as a 6th card, because at least I felt like the theory was if your opponent only ever ended on like a single copy of Snatchy in the Yummy matchup, you could just Ogre that. In practice, it felt okay. Like I never really got to use it on my turn 0 to stop a card like Azuna. A lot of times it just ended up being in my hand and being like an okay 1-for-1. So I'm not sure if I'd continue to play this in the future, but I think Ghost Ogre was at least worth talking about because it does have those bonus applications that some people may not have thought of. So that's going to do it for the main deck. I ended up playing 40 cards. I think 40 was a fine number. In the future, I did want to consider bumping up the deck count to like 42 and just adding 2 more starters while keeping like the non-engine count at 18. The reason being, I think there are a lot of 1-offs in this deck you don't necessarily want to draw. Like cards like Lupus, cards like Thisfern, cards like Cluster. Like these are not necessarily bricks, or in the sense that like you can't use them, but they just aren't as good quality as like some of the other cards. So I think in the future, I'm going to try playing a build with like maybe 42 cards and just upping the count of like chaotic elements or Case of K9 and seeing if that helps a little bit with like just drawing the 1-offs a little bit less. Outside of that though, I think my main deck was like pretty good for the main event and I'm pretty happy with like how it performed overall. And then next up for the extra deck, starting off with Synchros, I only play 1 El Skeltus and 1 Don Dragster, and that may seem weird because Crystron is a Synchro deck, but like you saw, we're only playing 1 copy of Tristaros, and I think this is like the absolute minimum that you can get away with like playing this deck. The first one, El Skeltus, like you're gonna make it throughout your combo normally to like add back cards like Cluster if you dumped it to the graveyard, add back Follow Up for next turn, and then you're going to use Tristaros to blow up El Skeltus to summon out 2 level 5s from the deck to go into Infinity, and then El Skeltus can bring back Tristaros for your opponent's turn, where it can turn into Don Dragster. So I don't think you need any other level 7 Synchros in this deck. You can, in theory, play extra copies of El Skeltus or Don Dragster, but I feel like those just don't come up enough to warrant playing. So overall, I'm very happy with just playing 2. Like, I don't think you need more than that. For the Xyz part of the deck, for the K9 stuff, we're playing 1 Ripper and 1 Werewolf. Ripper, of course, is like your key engine card in K9, and then Werewolf, you get to rank up into it with a quick play spell. In practice, I actually surprisingly rarely got to use Werewolf effect, even though I got to set up Ripper plus Quick Play Spell a lot of the times. That's something I found interesting, but I think you still have to play it, just because if you do get hit with cards like Charmies, and you don't really have that great of a play, like you can just end on Ripper as a half-board with the X-Force Liberation set, and then Ripper's an interruption, X-Force Liberation is an interruption, and then Werewolf is an interruption. So that's quite a lot off of a single card. So I think that I definitely wouldn't change this either. For the other rank 5s, I played 1 Nova and 1 Infinity. Pretty self-explanatory. All the Crystron level 5s are all machines. I also played 1 copy of Vimana. This one is a pretty solid rank 5 as well. Very importantly, like it is a machine, meaning like once you lock yourself into machines with effects like Sulfador, you can still make Vimana afterwards. Unfortunately, it is a light monster, so it is harder to go into this with like some of the K9 stuff, but you can still go into it with cards like Azuna if you do get hand trapped like mid Crystron combos. So I do think it still warrants playing, and it did come up for me a few times as well. I'm glad I still chose to play this card. And then for like the MVP, I think of the rank 5s like was Valon. And there are a couple different reasons, but I think Valon is actually like probably the best rank 5 in this extra deck. 1, it isn't a light monster, so you can easily use cards like Jokul and Lantern to go into it. Number 2, it's a rank 5 that only takes 1 Xyz material to disrupt your opponent, meaning you get 1 use on your opponent's turn if you summon it off Azuna, and then in theory if it goes back to you, you can use it again to force something out. Number 3, it also has a really neat effect to like when it gets sent to the graveyard, you just get to force out a back row right away, and this comes up a lot in like the Vanquish Soul matchup where they have Snow Devil, because otherwise your deck just doesn't have a great way to force it out other than with like SP. So this just gives you another way to play around that. And a lot of the times what I would do is like I would Azuna, dump Lupus summon itself back, make this. I would like book one of their guys for detaching Azuna, but then having Valon with Lupus under it is just really difficult for a lot of decks to deal with because you can't target it. And then once it gets back to me, I would just simply switch it to attack something, and then make Zeus on top of it. And whether or not the Zeus goes through, like, I'm still trading with like 2 cards because Valon would get rid of something and then Zeus would attempt to get rid of their whole board as well. Valon's definitely a card that I would continue playing this deck, and I think it might low-key be the best rank 5 in the extra deck. For the other rank 5s, I also played one Nash Knight and then one C107 just for the Nash Knight. Nash Knight, I think, was the card I made the least, but I feel like the theory of Nash Knight is good because this deck doesn't really have like a great way to non-targeting out something aside with like the K9 quick play spell. So I feel like it was important to have like a card that was able to get around targeting protection like Lupus. And then C107 is because you do need to attach a number between 101 and 107. And I chose C107 because it is the biggest one out of all those. And being big is important for Vimana's like other secret effect where it can boost a monster on the field with like half the Xyz monster's attack. So that effect never came up during the OTS Championship, but I think in theory could. And it doesn't really matter what this one is, so I figured why not just play the biggest one just in case that effect ever comes up. If I were to cut a card, the Nash Knight package might actually be the first thing to go. It does take up 2 extra deck slots, and I do want to try out some other potential like tech options like Typhon or something like that. Where I'm playing 1 copy of Riverstormer. This is what bridges your K9 to the Crystron side of the deck. You can just make it and then search a copy of Scrap Recycler, and then you get access to your full Crystron combo afterwards. And then probably the nastiest card in my extra deck being Paradise Smasher. You actually pretty much can't make this unless your opponent used a monster effect in the hand or grave. Cards like Jokul and Lantern prevent you from using the things they summon to actually summon into a light monster. So a lot of times, like, the only way you get to Dice Smasher is if your opponent hand traps you, you resolve Azuna, dump Lupus summon itself out, and then you get another level 5, whether it's like a Selfefnir or it's like a normal summon, a Jokul or Lantern, and then make this afterwards. I only ended up making it once, but of course, like, there are going to be times like where you get hit with like a bunch of Charmies, you get hit with like Lancia, cutting off your Crystron side of the deck. I felt like Dice Smasher was so important to have in those situations, so you can just force your opponent to pass back to you. I also don't really love making this card because there is a chance it will backfire, and I did see someone at the tournament like end up losing to their own Dice Smasher, so I choose not to make this card unless I absolutely have to. And then finally, 1 copy of Zeus. We are playing an Xyz deck. And then for the Link monsters, 1 copy of Clockwork Knight. This turns your Smiger into like a 1-card combo. But perhaps more importantly as well, you also get more value out of Scrap Recycler because you can link it off, use Clockwork Knight to tribute something like Riverstormer, bring back the Scrap Recycler, and Scrap Recycler is not once returned, so it can dump again. Clockwork Knight also has a cool bonus effect to where you can actually search the Clockwork Knight field spell, which I do side, and all the effects came up for me during the tournament, so Clockwork Knight is definitely a very important part. And then lastly, SP Little Knight is just the best generic link too, and a lot of times you're just going to have random bodies like Clockwork Knight and like Scrap Recycle on the board. You just want to turn it into something meaningful, so SP Little Knight was just the best card for that. I wouldn't change a single thing in the extra deck. I think the only thing I would consider changing is like perhaps the Nash Knight package or something like Typhon, but I actually summoned everything in my extra deck throughout the day, and they all felt pretty good. So I don't think I'd change anything in the extra deck specifically. And then moving on to the side deck, I played 3 copies of Artifact Lancia. I still want to respect decks like Malice. I thought it would still be pretty popular. And even though I didn't play a single one, I did still end up using it against Mermail, but I think Lancia still has enough coverage into decks like Malice, as well as like the Mirror Match, so I think it's still worth playing for the future. And plus, it is a level 5, so there are some niche cases where you can pair it with Jokul and it'll still be good. And then I actually chose to side deck 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird, and this was a pretty interesting decision because I was debating whether or not to main deck this for the longest time before the tournament. I still thought most people would be on decks like Mystery Ryziel, but in reality, I actually only ended up playing like new decks aside from like Mermail. So I think the choice to like side deck Droll and Lockbird was definitely correct. I really don't think Droll and Lockbird is too great into most of the new decks. You can make a case that like it's good against the K9 Mega Troll, it's good against like K9 Crystron, but it's just abysmal into Yummy. It's pretty abysmal into Draco Tail as well. For that reason, I just feel like there's just no reason to main deck this card, especially when everyone's on the new decks. And I'm pretty glad I made that decision because Droll and Lockbird really only came in against like Mermail. So I actually didn't end up using Droll and Lockbird as well. The old decks are still relevant enough to warrant siding at least Lancia and Droll. And then I played 1 copy of Talents and 1 copy of Call by the Grave. This is just like a going first package that's usable into like every single deck. A lot of decks also play on your turn 0, so Talents gets a lot of extra value as well. And Call by the Grave is pretty self-explanatory. It's just one of the best cards in the game we have. And I also played 1 copy of Clockwork Knight. This is a quote-unquote floodgate against certain decks because it makes it all their monsters machines. This is particularly important against the Yummy deck because it prevents them from going into Yummy Snatchy, which is their most important Link 1. And even though in theory they can still play with like their other Link 1s and go make synchros, if you pair this with like with like just any bit of half board, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to actually clear it and be able to do anything meaningful. Because if they don't have access to Snatchy, they're much less likely to be able to access the field spell, and then they're also not able to start synchro summoning on your turn as well. So Clockwork Knight is definitely something I would continue playing as well. It's also searchable off of the Link 1. And then for the rest of the side deck, I played like a Thrust package. I played 3 copies of Thrust, one copy of Dark Ruler No More, and then one D Barrier and one Sanctum. So my theory with Rust is like I wanted a card that was good into every single matchup, and I also felt like I was kind of scared of like people also playing on my turn 0 with decks like Microsoul having Holy Sue, with decks like Dracotel having 5 mana. Like I felt like Thrust would always be live turn 1, and I could search a card like Talents in those cases, and it'd be a huge blowout. In practice, that never happened. A lot of times my Thrust was just setting like the trap cards when going first, and in those cases I thought it was still okay, but I actually personally don't feel like the traps I chose were like particularly good for the event. D-Barrier I chose because it just covered like the most matchups, even though it wasn't necessarily the best into like some of the new decks like K9 Crystron or Yummy even. Like you'd be surprised, like if you call Synchro against Yummy, they can still set up a board of just like their Link 1 and their little guys and start playing on your turn. So I did want a card like Blackout Last for Yummy instead, but I wasn't able to get access to that. Blackout Last would just be a general coverage card that I could slide into every matchup, including Microsoul, and it would be particularly good into some matchups like Yummy because you can call Snatchy and they can't really do anything afterwards. I ultimately end up going with Sanctum because that's all I had access to, but once again, since I never used Lancia against Malice, I just never sided in Sanctum. Dark Ruler No More was my going second card of choice with Triple Tactics Thrust. I think this was fine. I did want a searchable board breaker with Triple Tactics Thrust that wasn't just talents, and even though in practice I never got to do that, I still feel like Dark Ruler is a pretty solid card into this upcoming format. I think it definitely has a lot of merit against some of the best decks. You can completely shut off like most of their interruptions, and even though like a lot of the best decks like Yummy, like K9 Crystron, like they still have stuff in the back row that they can play with, it should make it a little bit easier to deal with in most of those cases. I was pretty surprised with how good just like Engine felt at like playing into boards just because of how much extension that you got off a single Salvador or even resolving a single Jokal. So in the future, I'm probably going to end up cutting like the Thrust package and like these traps and play a card like Judgment, and then maybe just play like 3 extra board breakers like Dark Ruler or Eclipse. I'm still debating on like which one I want to do, but I think that's the idea I want to go with. I'd pick Judgment because this deck is kind of susceptible to board breakers like Dark Ruler because most of your interruptions are concentrated in your monster zone, and Judgment's able to stop that. Plus Judgment's just also applicable into every single matchup as well, so I wouldn't need to worry about having very specific cards for specific matchups. That's something I'm still testing, but those are just my current thoughts for now in terms of what I would side. All right, so that's going to do it for the deck profile. I know that was very long and I did yap for quite a while, but if you guys have any questions about the deck, I'd be happy to try to answer them in the comment section below. If you guys also think of like any changes that you think would be beneficial, like I'm also happy to hear your opinions. Generally, I felt like my main deck was pretty good. There are a few things I might consider changing. My extra deck was really good. I don't think there's anything I would want to change there. And then my side deck definitely needed a bit of work. Definitely something I'm going to rework as the format continues. Before I end off the video, I just want to quickly go over all the matchups that I played during my run. I did end up going 5-0 in Swiss, only losing the finals to Team Samurai X1. So I was 7-1 on the entire day. Round 1, I did play against Mermail, won that matchup 2-1. Round 2, I played against K9 Crystron, won that 2-0. Round 3 was K9 Crystron again. I won that one 2-0 as well. Round 4 was against Yummy. I won that 2-1. My opponent did make a mistake, and I should have lost game 3, but we did end up winning that one. Round 5, I played against Team Samurai X1, who's on Yummy. I'm pretty sure you guys have probably seen it by now, but if you guys, for some reason, haven't watched his Yummy deck profile, it's definitely a very entertaining watch. I was the cameraman for that video, and honestly, it was Sam is pretty good at being an entertainer. I'll just say that much. I ended up beating Sam 2-1, but at that point, it didn't matter because we were both XO, and we were guaranteed to make top 8 anyway, so that match wasn't super important, but we did end up winning that. In top 8, I played against the Mermail guy. I played round 1 again. I won that 2-1. Top 4 was against the Yummy guy. I played round 4, and I won that 2-1. And again, unfortunately, he just happened to make a critical mistake in game 3 that ultimately cost him the game, so I was able to take that down. And then in the finals, I played against Team Samurai X1 once again, who was on Yummy, but this time Sam was able to beat me, and I lost 1 and 2. So overall, I feel like it was a really good run for the deck. The deck performed a lot better than I thought it would in my head. I felt like compared to a deck like Malice that I was playing last format, this deck feels a lot more interesting to play. It also feels like you have a bunch more like extenders in this deck and different ways to like combo. So finding those lines was pretty enjoyable for me. I felt like this deck is something that's pretty cool. I don't think it's necessarily better than like Yummy or better than like K9 Crystron, but I think it's at least on a similar level as them. The K9 Engine definitely added a lot to this deck. It gives it a bunch more extenders and raises the ceiling of the Crystron deck by so much. Because in theory, yes, there are going to be times where you only have access to Crystron Engine. Let's say you have like 1 inclusion only. You're just ending on a normal Crystron end board. But I think in most cases, like both engines are going to be able to bridge to each other, and these both have very nice synergies with each other that make it so like the end board is like not only layered, but it also has like it's pretty much essentially just unbreakable. For context, like the standard end board that I was ending on was Cyber Dragon Infinity, SP Little Knight, K9 Ripper with the K9 X-Force Liberation set, I had Tristaros on the board, and then sometimes I'd also have an extra El Skeltos on the board, or I'd have an extra rank 5, depending on if my opponent hand trapped me and I was able to resolve Azuna. Not to mention I also had Cluster in the back row as well, so I'm not going to count all the interruptions, but it is a very layered end board with multiple negations, multiple different pops. Like, you have different types of interruption, and you have interruption in both your spell and trap zone as well as your main muster zone. So that's something I really liked about the deck. And like on top of all that, you'd also have follow up as well. It kind of feels like if the deck is able to combo, like you're just never winning the game unless you have very, very specific combinations of board breakers. But yeah, that's gonna do it for my yapping now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's a long one, so if you guys made it this far, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys are interested in seeing more competitive content like this, then be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be continually posting like new meta relevant content like for Justice Hunters and every other format that we get in the future as well. So be sure to sub to the channel so you don't miss that. But with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.